This is All Things College and Life. Hi, Jayan. Thanks for joining in. I know it's late on a Friday night, so really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Awesome. Thank you. And Jayan, your journey has been very interesting. And for anyone who is listening and watching this, let me tell you all firstly, Jayan and I are colleagues. We work at Next Track together. And how that journey started is very interesting. I know Jayan for quite a few years now. The company where I used to work before starting Nextrack, that is where Jayan started his first job. And over the years, I've just seen Jayan's career trajectory, go in different paths, and Jayan making some very critical decisions along the way. So also dealing with a lot of different challenges. So I just want to get into those. And I think Jayan's journey for anyone who's in their 20s, starting out work, having new experiences in their careers. I think there's a lot of learnings in Jayan's journey. So, really happy that he's here with us and he's willing to share a lot of the learnings that he's had over the years. So awesome, Jayan. I know, we're talking about work and career, but perhaps we can start with one step before that, and that's education. You, of course, went to a very good university in India called Flame. And I just want to start off with, what was that experience like? What was the education system at Flame like? And I think you were perhaps one of the initial batches at Flame as well. So I'd love to hear about the whole experience at Flame University.
Yeah. So Flame was India's first liberal arts school, and it's situated in a place called Lavli in Pune. And Flame follows sort of an American liberal arts system, just with the GPA system being different, of the GPA system being out of 10 instead of a 4 scale. Flame was, I think, a really good experience for me because you actually learn things that are not usually taught to you at a conventional Indian university. You get to choose subjects from different baskets in the first year. So it can be out of social sciences, languages, it can be out of like art related subjects. And then you have some essential core courses like critical reasoning, and you have ethics and IT, some essential future or next gen skills that you learn from these subjects. In the second year, you usually have to declare your major, which carries on till your third year. They also have an option to stay back for the fourth year, which is a postgraduate diploma program, which is called the Flame Scholars Program.
Interesting. And what was your major?
I had chosen marketing as my major.
Nice. And you mentioned about these next gen skills and trying to kind of keep up with the new world that we live in with technology, and Flame also trying to, of course, help students do that. Can you think of any skill set that you can recall that you found very useful coming out of Flame, going into your first job?
Yeah. So I think critical reasoning was like a course which like broadens your horizons and how to probably uh, deal with problems, of how there are like probably more than one solution to a problem, and how you can um, work your way onto those solutions. I think that was a very like good course I learned. IT was a critical course, like
Yeah.
teaching you from the basics of Excel to like an intermediate level. And public speaking was another core course that you had to do, which I think really helps me today.
Awesome. Happy to hear that. So, first job, that's always a scary thing for, anyone graduating from college and trying to find jobs. I remember I had some ideas, but I was still a bit clueless as to what I'm going to be doing and how I'm going to go about work and career. So, I would love to kind of hear what happened between Flame and that first job, and how did you end up landing that first job?
I think before I talk about like Flame to my first job, I just want to let you know I was really interested in sports since I've been a kid. and that's pretty much been like my core interest forever.
Yeah.
And I'd interned at a company called Baseline Ventures in Flame, and
Nice.
before that, also with the company called Sports Paddock, which does football leagues in Delhi and in NCR, Delhi, NCR, and Bangalore. So I've been like a sports fanatic for like life. So that's what I eventually wanted to get into.
Yeah.
At Baseline, they work with athletes. They're into athlete representation, management, brand licensing,
Mm.
and things like that. So coming out of Flame, I was very keen as a 22-year-old to get into the sports industry.
Yeah.
And through a common connect actually, which we had, I had actually reached out to you on LinkedIn regarding
Yeah.
the same. And at that time, you were working specifically with student athletes.
Mm.
And I had ended up joining the sister company of where you were working at to host sports events in India. So that's how like my interest in sports like culminated to a job in sports at
Yeah.
22.
Awesome. And if you can maybe try and remember, because I'm just trying to think of students who are perhaps graduating college and looking for those jobs, or even looking for internships. What was that process like for you to go through the interview stage, and were there any hiccups, or was it quite smooth?
I think what I started doing early on in probably this first year of college itself was trying to network with different people in the industry.
Hmm.
Um, Trying to gauge as much as I can about the industry, learn as much about it
Yeah.
by interacting with a lot of people, staying in touch with them. I made a LinkedIn profile, I think, in my second year of college. Though
Nice.
in today's time, it's like much more competitive, so I definitely advise to make one like a lot earlier.
Yeah.
So, besides that, of course, if you have connects in the industry, it always helps. But you have to be a self starter and actually be fearless of reaching out to people, and not be afraid of rejection at all. So with
Right.
this process, finding a job, I'd applied to like many jobs before that, and there were a lot of rejections, and there was one which I ended up like, getting,
Yeah.
and it was very daunting for me initially. Going about 3 months before graduating, I've started finding a job, and a lot of my friends, some of them had started finding a job 6 months earlier. Some of them were in the placement pool. Some of them weren't like interested in finding a job at all, and some wanted to go, study further. So I was in a very different place, like compared to a lot of my friends, especially the ones who were in my apartment.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just get as much like experience as I can in the sports industry as fast as I can.
Yeah.
So my first job was actually uh, through a cold reach out to you at on LinkedIn, and how you had referred me to the company that we
Yeah.
actually ended up working together, just in different divisions.
Right.
And I think that was the first like very serious interview probably in my life, and I was very like scared. But probably the only solution to cracking interviews is just by practicing and giving more as many as you can of like a
Yeah.
technique of exposure to maximum interviews, or trying to gain as much experience you can before your first job by giving a shot at getting an internship.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, not being afraid of getting rejected by it's become much more competitive now, where like people reject you even for like internships.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's about it.
No, that's interesting. And I remember, I think you're absolutely right about networking and just using your LinkedIn Connect as well, and using your networks as well, because, we're friends now, but I remember at that time, we were not friends at all. We just knew each other. We knew of each other through a common connect, which was actually, a football coach who I trained under, and you also knew well. And I think you were trying to work in sports. He knew that. He connected us, and that was it. I mean, I was also just a junior at that company at that time. I was just starting out as well. So I think I was maybe 1 year into it, but I still did not have any control over who gets hired, who doesn't. So for me, it was just a very simple thing. I sent the resume over to the management, and then they just took it forward. And I think a couple of months later, you were in the office. So that's awesome. But let's now coming to the career aspect of it. And I mentioned earlier at the start that there have been challenges, there were certain hardships that you also took on and dealt with. So I would love to kind of come to, uh, instead of going deeper into what was your role exactly and what were you doing at the sports events company, I would love to actually focus on what sort of happened from where you were, and what made you kind of, did you end up quitting, were you looking for other opportunities, and how did the transition happen into your next job? And I would love to know what that phase was like.
So initially, I had like some really good learnings at the company. Learned a lot about professionalism and how like events work from scratch.
Yeah.
And then I think around late 2019, like there started like news about COVID started coming out, and 2020 about March or April was when our division of the company, the events division, had like
Hmm.
decided to take a pause, uh, sort of into a dormant status where they won't be functioning until further notice or things get better COVID wise, because the government had imposed many restrictions.
Yeah.
At that time, I was asked to take 1 month of unpaid leave, and honestly, at that company, I didn't have the best time after the
Hmm.
first few months, because I felt there's quite a lot of pressure put onto like very young guy
Hmm.
without much support. So at that time, I was quite happy about the 1 month of unpaid leave because of probably the mental break that I got.
Hmm. Wow.
Uh, so at that time, I was probably just watching Netflix shows and trying to learn different things online, like trying to like search up how to use Excel in probably a manner that I hadn't learned at work or at Flame.
Yeah.
1 month into it, uh, I think they told me like we have an opening at our consulting or college counseling division
Hmm.
as a research associate. And that was something at that time like my parents had told me to take up like without like batting an eyelid, because there were not many jobs available in the market.
Yeah. It was just the start of COVID, if I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's work from home at that point of time, 5-day job. There's like no weekends.
Yeah.
But that was like when I decided to do something probably like at that time which my parents didn't like, or my
Hmm.
family members would really question. I decided to like not take that job for like my mental sanity to be better, in a better state. And thereafter, 2 months after that, is really hard for me to find a job at that point of time,
Hmm.
especially in the sports industry. There was nothing happening, and things were just at a level where pretty much the whole country's sporting facilities were shut. There was no international sporting events,
Yeah.
and everything had gone online. And that's like when I had to realize that I need to pivot into a new industry, probably that's working majorly on like an online vertical.
Hmm. Interesting.
So after probably applying to 100 jobs at that time, I had got like uh, call back from 3 to 5 companies.
Yeah.
And I got a call back at that time from an edtech company who wanted to gamify learning for K to 5 kids
Yeah.
from kindergarten to fifth grade. And I thought of that to be very interesting because it's not something that's been done in India.
Yeah.
And after 3 months of looking for a job, I'd finally, cleared their interviews, which I found to be quite interesting, even though it was COVID and I was the first operational member. They were
Yeah.
very keen to know if I'm a cultural fit. So there
Hmm.
was a very different interview experience for me, which I hadn't done,
Yeah.
with other companies. So once
Interesting. But if we just take a pause there, I want to actually go back to that sort of transition that you had. Um, so we're at the start of COVID, and you're on unpaid leave, and it's interesting that you said that you were actually happy about the first month because it was like a big mental break. And I guess what you're saying is then you got an opportunity, but you just realized you didn't want to be a part of that culture, and you felt that mentally it perhaps can take a toll on you. But I'm just curious, did you know what sort of a toll it was taking on you until the unpaid leave? Because it sounds like you weren't going to quit on your own. It was almost like COVID came, the break happened, and it kind of pushed you away from that organization. So, were you thinking of leaving on your own, or were you the awareness of where am I stuck sort of a thing only came later on during that break?
I think I was always thinking of leaving probably after like hitting like a 6 month mark itself. I was there for a year,
Hmm.
uh, but after a few months, or after 6 months, after the 6 month mark hit and COVID started coming nearer, I was just happy at that time just have a job.
Yeah.
But it got quite taxing on me because I thought, if COVID had hit, things might get a little easier in terms of events. We had to like engage in a lot of online activations, and the work actually increased in that point of time because we would probably, maybe, the company management was in denial that everything would be all right at that point of time.
Hmm.
But that was not happening. We tried a
Makes
lot of
sense.
online activations which failed, and I knew like probably like 8 9 months into this stint that this company is not going to survive because of the restrictions that were imposed by the
Yeah.
government and so on. But probably there's like a state of like perpetual anxiety or stress in
Hmm.
that at that place.
Yeah.
I was also much younger. I didn't know how to deal with stress as well, but
Fair
I
enough.
felt like there was a burden on me to do uh, not complex but a plethora of tasks
Hmm.
that I wasn't trained to do, or had no experience doing.
Yeah.
So
Very
that was
interesting.
where the sense of relief came from, that I won't
Yeah.
to do this for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. And it's also, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that your first job was like that. Because on one hand it can kind of prepare you for very poor management. So from there on, any management and leadership that becomes better than that is feels like a win. But I think sometimes it's also, anyone who asks me, sometimes when we've hired in the past and kind of interviewed people, I think the biggest advice I've always had is that for your first job, just pick good management, just pick good leadership, pick a good manager who you're going to work with, and a good team, because the biggest thing you need right now is just the learning aspect. So I guess I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but you also mentioned that your parents, the mindset was at that time that take that job, there's some cushioning around it, it's safe, and you were very against that. And you mentioned you were 22 at the time. So how was that discussion at home, and how did that go down exactly? How did you convince them?
I think I've been pretty much like an outlaw or unconventional person, or not wanting to, join or give it a shot at a KPMG or a Deloitte, or from
Yeah.
the beginning. So they were kind of used to that. They were
Yeah.
happy with the fact that I'd found my first job on my own. And coming to the part where I had to speak to them about leaving this firm and not taking up the role after the 1 month unpaid leave ended,
Yeah.
it was tough. It took a lot of convincing, but I told them that this is what would probably be best for me in
Hmm.
terms of my mental headspace. And
Yeah.
they were quite understanding about that. Yeah.
That's great. I think that also helps, right? When you do have parents who can be understanding about these things, that's a blessing as well.
Yeah.
And kudos to you for kind of taking that call, going through those 100 interviews and 100 applications you mentioned, and then finding another decent fit. But you also mentioned you had to pivot from that sports industry, which is also a very important skill, right? Because I think COVID brought in things that at least our generation has never experienced, or never, I mean, we've never seen circumstances like that. And at that point, the only thing you could do is adapt, adjust. And if that meant maybe moving away from the sports industry, then perhaps that wasn't the end of the world if you were getting another job. So good. So how is the second job now? Coming to that, what was that experience? Now you've pivoted into the education and technology sector a bit more, which is another new field for you at that point in time. And what was your role there? What did it comprise of? How was it different from your first job?
So my second role was also like in the operations department, but the industry was completely different from sports, moving into like online education.
Yeah.
So my day to day was role was to handle operations and pretty much seeing if scheduling of classes was going well at one point of time, giving feedback on what the product was about, incorporating net promoter score and customer satisfaction surveys, taking feedback from customers,
Hmm.
creating a an end-to-end feedback loop. It then moved on to a role that required me to become someone who was managing a team of 17 and move into business development role where we
Wow.
had targets of booking maximum number of trial classes for our kids,
Hmm.
and you are supposed to make these targets and ensure these targets are completed by your team.
Interesting.
So, and my third probably phase at this company was more into trying to get into influencer marketing, or getting influencers for the company, whether it's mom influencers or students, or micro to nano level of influencers who are like lifestyle influencers as well, to
Yeah.
promote the brand.
Very interesting and so different from your first job. How did you like the whole experience though? Because at this point you had moved away from sports, so were you still able to enjoy what you were doing, or was it just a job and something you just had to do?
I think initially it took some time for me to get used to firstly just working from home. That
Hmm.
was a big change for me. And since I was the first person in operations, a lot of the role also required training people who came on after me.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'd say compared to the first company, it's a very, very different experience. There was a lot
Makes sense.
of physical effort put into the first job in terms of events. And here's
Hmm.
a lot of like, it's a lot of mental effort put in for quite, you know, uh, for long hours. And especially with the second job being for 6 days a week, your off day was probably on a weekday. See, it
Ah,
takes
interesting.
time to get accustomed to such things.
Yeah. How interesting. And let's talk about where you went from there, because obviously you switched over to another organization after that in the edtech field.
Yeah.
But again, what happened in the second organization? How did that come to a close?
I think the product that they had wasn't, up to the expectations of what customers wanted, or the curriculum wasn't very strong.
Hmm.
So they found it very hard to sell their courses after a while. Also, like towards the end of COVID, uh, sorry, not towards the end of COVID, but during like the midway point, probably till this when this company survived.
Yeah.
Uh, Maybe what was wrong with this company was releasing a half-baked product for the students,
Hmm.
and the user experience wasn't as great. and also probably the quality of teachers that were onboarded. So I think these two things really led to the downfall of that company. And
Interesting. Mm.
eventually that company had to shut down because of severe losses.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my third company is also an edtech company.
Hmm.
At a larger scale, that is a company, probably 800 to 1,000 people, had much higher funding. It is
Nice.
funded from companies like Google. So I thought that would be a broader horizon probably for me to, uh,
Yeah.
give a shot at. And at that company too, I was working as a teacher operations manager, where you basically handle any questions that a teacher will have,
Hmm.
from pretty much their onboarding to if they decide to leave the company, help them deal with questions if they have regarding their classes, any company policies, technical difficulties, and so on. The third company was a different experience, probably because of the scale they were operating at.
Yeah.
Um, but here at this third company, COVID had started ending, and probably this company wasn't able to adapt to an offline model, or
Yeah.
release, have centers offline by the time they probably should have. Maybe they were too late to that party, and I feel that probably customers also started finding their online classes too expensive
Hmm.
when they were probably getting offline classes around the same kind of
Yeah.
price. So that company also went through a round of layoffs, and that is when I think you and I had got in touch,
Hmm.
and I had not seen this company also doing so well and incurring like huge losses. That is
Yeah.
when I decided to move out from that company, join
Yeah.
next track.
So the second organization that you joined, the edtech space, that company shut shop, basically shut operations. Of course, anyone who was there was asked to leave. And then the third one, you were feeling like that day may come at some point in the future, so you decided to switch out. But I just want to come back at that ending of the second stint. And that can't be easy, right? Because you've the first job, it's an unpaid leave, you were offered something else, you've seen a part of the business which you did join shut down, the sister company offered you a different job, you said no to that, made a very bold decision at that time, and now with this new company, things shut down, which is of course quite unfortunate in the reality of startup world as well. uh, but how was that experience at that point? I mean, how did you feel? Because you're still, I guess at that time you must have been still closer to mid 20s,
Yeah.
and you've had two experiences which have not been too fruitful. uh, but I also noticed, you just, when you were kind of sharing your story, you just moved on from the second job to the third job and without thinking too much. So it also tells me that perhaps your moving on phase was quite quick. But talk to me a little bit about, how were the feelings and what did you think of the whole thing, that now it's shut shop, I'm being laid off, and I have to deal with this and I have to find something new. So what was that whole experience like?
Initially, I felt miserable because I was their first operations hire.
Yeah.
And at that time, it's very hard to process because you feel that you helped build product or a service from pretty much from scratch. Because when I joined that company, it was sort of pre-revenue.
Hmm.
Uh, and then, when you asked to leave, citing probably not like issues that are going with the company's cash flow or the company's balance sheet isn't red, but more because of you not being able to perform. It hurts, probably quite, it hurts quite a bit. Uh, but then I saw that happen to at least probably 25 other people at that company.
Hmm.
So maybe I found comfort in the fact that we were all uncomfortable with this situation and we all had to move on.
Yeah.
And it was it was not a premonition, but probably whether it's the second company or the third, I saw that you can just probably see that things are a bit off in terms of like revenue when you start seeing different people being laid off before you.
Yeah.
So I think at that point the only option was to just not probably ponder too much about it, but to just move forward because it was anyways a tough time with COVID being there.
Hmm.
And I thought the best option that time would just to be trying to find a job as soon as possible, the next job.
Yeah. And how long did that take you from being like laid off to finding the next job?
I think luckily when I was in my last 6 days at my second company,
Hmm.
I was able to get a job on
Wow.
LinkedIn. So I think that is a matter of luck because after my first company, I wasn't able to find a job for 3 months.
Hmm.
So this was probably a matter of luck, and they were really trying to expand their team at that point of time and look for people who came from the tech space. So there was a sort of a fit. Yeah. And
I mean,
I
I
took
think
a
you call it luck, but I also think luck is something that is you do get lucky, but you've also seen enough unluckiness. I think before that, I guess that at some point luck also had to play in your favor. And I think what you said is it sounds so simple to do that it's happening to everyone else around you. What can you do about it? Just gotta move on, don't ponder over it. And these are very easy things to say because people just say it out, but it's so hard for like someone who's a young adult and who's experiencing these kind of things. And I feel like sometimes you're told so many rosy things in college about what life can look like, what jobs you can get, what careers you can have, that being laid off is just not talked about enough. And I'm sure it's not an easy thing to go through. Uh, but it's amazing that you were able to kind of just walk past that and just say let's look forward and let's move on to the next chapter. I truly feel moving on from certain things and looking forward is such an underrated skill set and characteristic in people that if you can have that, it's so amazing. So I mean, good stuff on having that belief in yourself that you'll find something, because you call it luck, I call it self belief and the ability to move forward. That's it. That's super. And we talked a little bit about you of course moved into another edtech space, and for a certain while it was doing well, but there were certain products that were not working too well. uh, I think you and I have discussed this a bit, that sometimes there was also a little bit of a fear of what if this happens. But I remember when you were joining Nextrack, and for everyone who doesn't know Nextrack, we're a bootstrapped company. It's a small team. There's no funding. It's completely bootstrapped. And there was this question of at home when you were talking with your family and thinking about making that switch. There was another question which was around, can you really trust another 20-year-old founder who is completely bootstrapped? There's no funding. There's no Google and all putting money behind this now. And is this really the next step that you want to have in your career? So I would love to hear about what that experience was like, what those conversations were like. Because even like, I think even as a friend to friend and colleague, I don't know what happened behind those doors at your home and what convinced you to finally join Nextrack. Whatever it was, I'm glad. But I would love to kind of hear about that after having these experiences. What made you still have that self belief that I'm willing to trust another founder with their vision and join this?
Yeah. So I think initially when I told my parents about me, wanting to join Next Track, there was a lot of skepticism from them because they had not probably known, what is the backing of the company, how old the company is. There wasn't probably as much historical data that would,
Yeah.
satiate their need of wanting to know what the numbers have been like for the company.
Yeah.
And at that time, I think I just told them that I'd I just see business, or like any place that I worked at for that time was my third job,
Hmm.
in green or red in terms of balance sheet. In the third company that I was at, even the second one, they were both funded. The third one was heavily funded,
Yeah.
but probably beyond that bubble of funding, I didn't, see what revenue they had projected, and
Hmm.
what the actual revenue had turned out to be. Was There was a vast difference between that. I was comfortable going into that job of probably, knowing also that if I'm here, not here today, doesn't make as much of a difference. I
Yeah.
wasn't learning much. Learning was pretty much stagnated. And at that time, probably leaving and convincing my parents uh, to let me join Extract was also one, probably because I'd worked with you earlier. So I had like faith in the founder. And that is probably a bigger factor that, I consider now, as to when I was like in my early 20s. Now I'm closer to being 30.
Hmm.
So I think that was one factor which I convinced them on, was the founder of Next Track, which is you, and how I see you had picked a niche, stuck with that niche, and done well in that niche.
Yeah.
Second point, I was probably talking to them about it, how I would never grow if I would uh never seek discomfort in my life of
Wow.
being from in a comfortable job, not seeing that company doing well, but being, just not probably having to work as hard, and that could probably carry on for a while. Maybe I would have got laid off in the third company because it was sinking. And the third lesson would be probably not resisting challenges.
Hmm.
And by challenges, I mean maybe at that time joining Next Track was a risk for me. Moving
Yeah.
from a bigger company to a smaller setup. So I think those are two, 3 points that I've spoken to my parents about. It took a lot of convincing, probably a lot of arguments,
Yeah.
but then they'd agreed because I told them, the business model at the third company, in my eyes, was failing.
Hmm.
And also, probably the opportunity in Next Track to be learning something completely different
Yeah.
and starting over in terms of moving from ed tech to like um, counseling at that point in time was my role.
Hmm.
So it was a huge learning curve,
Yeah.
and for me at that point of time, and at
Also,
that
you got a huge raise. Don't
yeah,
forget that.
yeah, that's something I was gonna come to. That is definitely one of the motivating factors, especially as get. I'm not saying like get older, however it is, but probably with every year,
Yeah.
the second, third company are not able to beat inflation or adjusted inflation, to the best possible way of getting a raise of maybe 9 to 11%. I also
Hmm.
wasn't like happy with that after putting in a lot of effort. So definitely the raise was, I think, definitely amongst the top two factors to switch.
Yeah.
First would I'd say would be founders mentality. Um, founders work ethic, seeing, what the business model is about, how it's been going,
Hmm.
how it's, you know, how it was been for Next Track at that point in time. I think it'd been like 2 years or one and a
Yeah.
half years. And based on our conversations, it was profitable. In fact, from the first month, not much of like marketing spend.
Hmm.
So there was no concept of, like probably of what is like the average marketing spend on Facebook, what was the ROAS. There's nothing involved here. most of the clients were coming out of word of mouth with minimal marketing. So
Still
that's
are.
always a good sign. So that's
Yep.
always a good sign of joining or associating a company with. So
Yeah.
these were like probably the green flags that I saw at next track would be probably founders mentality, positive revenue being in green throughout, probably from then to touchwood now. And yeah, third, definitely money would be a very big factor when you have to start,
Yeah.
probably contributing more to home or paying more bills, things getting more expensive. So would definitely be a big factor.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you did that convincing and made sure you joined, because here we are now.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's such an interesting journey, I guess, Jayan, through your 20s, uh, going from one company to the other. And I think every company was like a new learning, was a new challenge. And I think, anyone who's watching this, who's listening this, I truly feel the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway, I think for me at least, is that just focus on what is kind of ahead of you. Be willing to kind of accept some change. Everything is not going to be the same. Even if you're in a company for a really, really long time, the role will keep changing. You will have more challenges. And, like Jayan said, which I something I loved, that uh, if you're just sitting and being very, very comfortable, there's something perhaps off there as well. And that doesn't mean that you need to be in a very toxic place where you're, mentally you're just stressed out all the time. It also shouldn't mean that. But if your role, if your job is challenging you in certain ways, it's asking you to step up, it's asking you to grow a bit more and be a little uncomfortable. I think that's also a very healthy thing, and that's where growth really happens. But one last question that I have for you, Jayan, which is, like, looking back at all these experiences, college and all the different roles and the jobs, what, or well, would you say there were some very key decisions that you made, uh, which really changed the course of your career and where you are now? And uh, what were some of those decisions? And uh, I'm just trying to understand that, had you not made some of those key and critical decisions, what would life look like today for you?
So I think the first factor would be like uh, it's imperative probably for every youngster who probably age from from 18 to 25, just to have a mentor, to have someone who is able to guide you on things or aspects of life that you've not experienced yet. So I luckily had my parents as mentors, my older brother as a mentor. But another thing I would say is probably to have a mentor out of your outside your
Hmm.
family, where opinions are completely unbiased. It can be a friend, it can be someone who's in the industry.
Yeah.
I think maybe at my third company, I had few people who I really looked up to and
Hmm.
who had given me very good advice as to very good unbiased advice as to maybe at that point in time why I should leave that company and why it would help me for my growth. And the second thing I would say is probably there will be times in your life where you would get a lot of advice from a different number of people, but sometimes you just got to listen to yourself.
Wow.
And other people might think of it to be selfish, but sometimes you're going to put your needs ahead of everyone else's, because if there's one person you're going to spend maximum time with in your life, that's going to be you. And if it's about keeping you happy, and I'd say the third thing would be experiences taught me a lot.
Hmm.
My first two company experiences being ones with both companies shutting down,
Yeah.
third one being a bit better. it probably it gave me a great sense of understanding of different industries, different businesses, how to deal with different kind of people, how to deal with difficult people.
Yeah.
And throughout these three companies, I think, barring the third one, the first two companies were quite uh, difficult in terms of a lot of work being assigned to one
Mm.
person because of probably budget constraints. So what it did was it taught me probably how to be efficient, optimize my time in a way, but
Yeah.
also realizing what is my boundary of work physically, mentally, and conveying that to my line manager or whoever I was working with at that point of time.
Wow.
So probably knowing your boundary of what is your capacity to work physically or mentally is very good. Doesn't mean that you don't push, you don't like seek discomfort,
Yeah.
but I
I
think
think there's a
self-control
balance
is
there.
also very important at
Yeah.
particular times, which I
You're right.
hadn't probably when I was between 22 to 25. I would say yes to almost everything.
Yeah.
And probably at a very young age, I thought, I was getting burnt out mentally.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I hear you. I mean, I think there's a good boundary between seeking discomfort and uh, putting yourself in a place where mentally you're feeling really challenged and really exhausted. And I think uh, it's important to find that balance as well. And you're right. I mean, I think even in my first job, I said yes to kind of everything. And I moved to Bombay, I remember, and stayed in this. Moving to Bombay was not a problem for 2 months, but I stayed in such a bad apartment, I cannot tell you. And I later realized the budget I was told for an apartment was just not sufficient for the Bombay life. I thought for Gurgaon it's enough and I was happy with it. But, that's a story for another time. But I think it's interesting because as you said that boundary point, uh, it's very true. I think even though like I'm an entrepreneur now and I decide a lot of my things on my own, uh, I do think sometimes even when it's about which client to take on, or sometimes to avoid certain clients, sometimes to avoid certain conversations with certain people, I feel it's very important to create that boundary. But unfortunately, you only learn that with time. It's very, at least I didn't know what my boundaries were when in my first 2 or 3 years, I would just do what I was told to do, and I would kind of uh, follow my mentors and my managers and all blindly sometimes as well, until you started getting a mind of your own that no, you know what, this is not okay and this is not right. But I think that takes time. Anyway, on that note, Jayan, thank you so much for this. I think very, very valuable insights for everyone who will listen to this. And I'm so glad you were able to join. And I am so proud of your journey as well, because I think you've come a long way. So, super. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's like firstly very good questions. I thought really like got me to like think about a lot of things, and a lot of things I've not thought about for ages.
Yeah.
So it feels like you're almost like tapping into memories, some that are good, some that are not. But I'd love, I'm really happy that I was able to like share my, work story with, people who are
Yeah.
probably watching this, and especially people who are younger, and hopefully, there's some useful insights in this for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend, Jayan, and I will see you in office on Monday.
You too. See you soon.
If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Instagram.